Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. April 21st, 2023. We thought this year we would treat ourselves to an extra week's holiday before the annual slog of getting everything ready before our holiday apartments are open. Direct flights at that time of year were patchy, so I was surprised to find one to Vienna, and even more surprised to find a direct train from Vienna to Prague, the two places we had been wanting to visit for years. What a joy it was to travel at that time of year with airports virtually empty, and with only hand luggage. We were in the departure lounge within minutes. The plane was half empty, so we had 3 seats to ourselves, which always seemed such a luxury. We arrived in Vienna mid-afternoon, where we had arranged for a taxi to pick us up. Having only carry-on luggage, we had intended to go by train to our hotel, but it turned out a taxi wasn't much more expensive. Federika always likes to ask where the taxi driver is from, which is rarely from the country we are visiting, and things got a little awkward when it turned out he was Serbian. Neither of us cared where anyone was from, but you never knew what the other person was thinking. There was no shortage of criticism about Dubrovnik and how much better things were in Montenegro, but he was pleasant enough, and the journey went quickly. We discovered that the city was full of people from ex-Yugoslav countries, and we heard Croatian being spoken everywhere. We checked in at the Mercure Grand Hotel Biedermeier. It was a modest 4-star hotel that cost nearly £200 a night, and if we wanted breakfast, it was an extra £21 each a day. Neither of us ate much for breakfast, so we had intended to go to a local cafe, but that wasn't much cheaper, so we ended up in the hotel, which was much more convenient. Being tired from the journey, we were caught off guard when the receptionist told us they were part of a scheme where if we agreed not to have our room serviced, they would put the money saved towards a children's charity. We agreed, but it later occurred to me that the scheme made no sense. If our room didn't get cleaned, then the cleaner didn't get paid, so it was effectively the cleaner who was giving the money to charity. We had planned to have a short rest before going exploring, but Federika discovered she had lost her passport. We spent ages scouring every inch of the room, but it became obvious that the only place she could have left it was on the plane. She phoned the airline, but it was a nightmare getting through to anyone these days, and some companies refused point-blank to give you a number to call. She did manage eventually, but all they would tell us was to contact lost property at the airport. It was even harder to find a number for lost property, and when Federika finally managed to call, all she got was a message saying to look on the website. The website told me to fill in an online report form, which I was sure would get sent to that great email eating machine in the sky, but I did as instructed, and having accepted there was nothing more we could do until the next morning, we were determined to enjoy what was left of the day. Even if it was lost, it was not the end of the world, as Federika always travelled with her Croatian passport as well as her British, so we could at least travel as normal. The main worry was the nightmare of getting a replacement passport in Croatia. We were surprised to find that the hotel offered a free walking tour the next morning, so we booked ourselves on that and went for a late lunch. We were very tired and hungry and certainly not up to hunting around for a place to eat, so we ended up in a shopping mall food court eating Korean food. It was okay, but hardly what we were expecting to eat in Vienna, although apart from schnitzel, I had no idea what passed for local cuisine in that part of the world. As always, we took a stroll around town after dinner and ended up at the cathedral with its large square in front. There were lots of horse-drawn carriages waiting for customers with very bored-looking horses who were perfectly happy with the lack of trade. We walked a lot, so it was a relief to get back to the hotel for an early night. Next morning we made our way to the meeting point for our walking tour, which was already a fair distance even before we discovered the receptionist had sent us to the wrong place. My leg was hurting and I was already tired, so as we were obviously lost, I pleaded with Federika to let me use Google Maps. She hated Google Maps, but was gradually coming around to it after the number of times it had got us out of trouble. I was shocked to see we were still 1.5 kilometers away, but Google took us straight there, where the guide and a small group of people were waiting. The tour guide was brilliant and took us around lots of small streets, telling us all the things we would never have found out for ourselves. From our starting point, she pointed down to a 2-lane highway where the river Danube flowed before they moved it to a more convenient place. There were secret tunnels everywhere, and in the past we would have had great pleasure in walking through them. But thanks to health and safety and the fear of insurance claims, no one was allowed to use them anymore. During the tour, she gave details about Mozart's time in Vienna and pointed to a museum that was once one of the many apartments he rented and did his composing. I was very interested and made a mental note to go back later to visit it properly. We seemed to walk for miles, but I managed to find somewhere to sit in some of the places, so it turned out to be a very enjoyable experience and just what we needed on our first day. I was always torn between the love of freedom and coming and going as I chose, and the fact that half the time I had no idea what we were looking at. During the tour, we were shown a cafe that was famous for its Wiener Schnitzel. You usually had to book well in advance, but as it was still early when we finished the tour, we managed to get a table. I enjoyed the Wiener Schnitzel, which was about the size of a football pitch, and although it was very good, a Wiener Schnitzel doesn't taste much different in Vienna as it does in Mlini. Federika had some kind of boiled beef thing, which she was disappointed with. During the morning, I was amazed to find that the airport's lost and found office had sent me an automated message that Federika's passport had been found and that I had to go to the office to pick it up. I was very impressed with the service, but it did seem weird that they would only keep the passport for 24 hours. What was that all about? If we couldn't get to the airport that day, were they going to throw the passport in the rubbish bin or sell it to a passport dealer? Fortunately, we had nothing planned that afternoon, so at great expense we took the fast train directly to the airport. The office had a price tariff of what they charged to return items, and a passport, being the smallest size, cost €10. Heaven knows what a suitcase costs. It was such a relief to get Federika's passport back, which she had apparently left on the plane. We took the train back to town and spent the afternoon walking around. I was keen to see the Mozart Museum, but the reviews were not great, so Federika went off by herself and we met up later. I enjoyed my visit, but it was a bit cheeky calling it a museum. Every single exhibit was a replica or an example of the kind of furniture Mozart might have used. He was notorious for moving house, depending on his finances and how much money he had lost gambling, so he only lived there for 3 years. I paid extra for an audio guide and was interested in discovering that, contrary to popular belief, Mozart was very highly paid and was only poor because of his extravagance and his passion for gambling. He wasn't buried in a pauper's grave, but in common with everyone else at that time, he was dumped in a big hole because there was no room for individual graves in such a dense city. What made the visit worthwhile was standing in the exact same room where Mozart wrote The Marriage of Figaro, so it felt like there was something of him present. When I was a session musician in London, I was able to read and play any piece of music put in front of me. I could also do modest orchestrations. Despite my ability, I used to marvel at the next level of musicians, the arrangers who could sit on a train on their way to the studio and write scores without an instrument. They were able to hear every single instrument in their heads and write down each part, knowing exactly what the harmonies should be without needing to try them out. Then you had Mozart, who was light years ahead of even the most skilled arrangers and composers. His ability to play and compose brilliantly at an absurdly young age was well known, but less well known was the time he went to listen to a concert of Allegri's Miserere at St. Peter's in Rome. It was an extraordinary piece of music, which was a heavily guarded secret, strictly only ever played at St. Peter's Church. At the age of 14, Mozart was so moved by it that he went home and wrote out the entire piece from memory, including all the harmonies and without a fault. To me, that goes beyond genius and into the supernatural. So with all that in mind, I stood in that room and wondered what Mozart would make of the music concert that was being held down the road in the Bergarten, where his famous statue was situated. There was a large group of youngsters standing around the stage, where someone was playing nothing more than a recording of a bass drum and hi-hat, which was created by a machine. As always, the bass drum could be heard from kilometers away, and for all I knew, poor Wolfgang might have been able to hear it from wherever he was. I met up with Federica in a nearby cafe and enjoyed a fruit juice before continuing our stroll around the city while we got our bearings for places to visit the next day. I knew we had walked a lot that day, but I was surprised to be told by my watch that we had covered 24 kilometers. That was about the distance I usually walked in a year. We noticed that there were preparations being made for a marathon the next day, so it was pleasant walking around the wide streets that were already blocked off. There was a helicopter continually buzzing around, and while I understood the need to use helicopters to coordinate the preparations, I do think they should be fitted with silencers. Next day we visited the Schönbrunn Palace. We had recently seen a TV series about the Habsburgs, which we really enjoyed. We wanted to use a hop-on, hop-off bus, but the marathon messed up that plan as half the city was blocked off. The train station was a 5-minute walk from our hotel, so we took the underground from there, which was very convenient. I had checked out ticket prices for the palace the day before and found they were offering jump-the-queue tickets, which looked a little complicated with all the different options, so we thought we would just arrive and take it from there. On our arrival, I was shocked to see that, despite being the off-season, there was a sign saying, "Wait for entrance to the palace in excess of 3 hours." There was no way we were waiting for 1 hour, let alone 3, and I was cursing myself for not buying the jump-the-queue tickets the day before, but I realized that the information given by the tourist office was completely wrong. There was simply no queue to jump. You couldn't get into the palace without a ticket, and if we bought one when we arrived, there was a 3-hour wait before we could use it. Federica was not keen on visiting inside the palace, and although I wanted to, I was well aware that I enjoyed those things for around 10 minutes before boredom and sore legs got the better of me, so maybe it was just as well. There was still the enormous garden to see. Some sections had to be paid for, like the orangery, or a section with a few plants, but they didn't seem worth it. I really didn't like the policy that was creeping in everywhere of charging a lot for a main ticket and then charging extra for some of the attractions inside. The grounds were lovely and there was plenty to see. One area that looked weird was full of ruins that looked out of place. Federica thought they were Greek, but although my knowledge of Roman history was limited to Monty Python's Life of Brian, it all looked very Roman to me. It turned out that there was a weird fashion at the time of creating fake ruins, so it was meant to be Roman but had distinct Greek overtones, which must be horrifying for any real historian. We were really lucky with the weather, and most of the time I was walking around in just a shirt. Up to the day before our arrival, it had been raining for weeks. The problem was that as soon as the sun went down, it got a lot colder. It meant that I had to carry a rucksack everywhere and continually take my jacket off and put it on again. That afternoon we went to the Leopold Museum, as Federica was very keen on the artists Klimt and Schiele. I went along and also took the audio guide tour, but I didn't even make my regulation 10 minutes before getting bored. There were some very strange voices on the audio telling me what I should be looking for and what the artist was trying to say, which always irritates me. As far as I am concerned, to say that I don't like a work of art because I don't understand it is a patronizing cop-out. I followed Elvis's footsteps and left the building, where I found a wooden bench, which I had no trouble understanding. It was created for me to lie on and have a very pleasant afternoon nap in the sunshine. I was very happy to hear later that Federika had really enjoyed the exhibition. One thing that was a little disappointing was that we expected Vienna to be wall-to-wall pastries, but we were coming to the end of our stay and still hadn't managed to find any. We were determined to find these elusive treats, but the main square and everywhere around it was so busy we couldn't even find a seat, let alone a pastry. The closest thing we found was a shop selling ice cream with a small display of cakes in the front, so we bought 2 cannoli and sat in the last 2 available places in the whole of Vienna. They weren't even seats, but a gap amongst tourists, on a stone step surrounding a statue. I had eaten similar pastries in Italy with light, fluffy pastry and yellow cream inside, but these were awful, and I threw most of mine away. So that was the beginning and the end of our grand Viennese pastry extravaganza.
It really doesn't matter at all. Life goes on, I'll carry on, I'll stumble, but I won't fall. Don't get me wrong, I love you as much as any woman can, but I won't be a slave to a heartache, no, not for you or any man.
We took a train from the main station, which was very confusing because the same station had 2 different names. I booked the tickets from Croatia and was surprised to find that the price from one train company was €120 return and another company only €52. Thinking that the cheap train might be like one of those Indian trains where you have to sit on the roof, I had a good look at the photos, but as both trains looked the same, I went for the cheaper one. There was also a strange pricing structure. Economy class was the cheapest, then came first class, and club class was the most expensive, and that was only €4 more. We went for the first class, and the seats were very comfortable, with a table in front. It always sounds so exciting to travel abroad on a train, and every time we went to India, we were determined to do a long rail journey, but we always ended up flying because of the convenience. Now was the chance to travel on a comfortable train, so we were looking forward to it. My interest in fields and trees faded after 7 minutes, so I joined 95% of the passengers who were studying their mobile phones. I could at least claim to be using it for studying with my Croatian learning app. It was a nice smooth ride, and the 4.5 hours to our destination passed in no time. The Uber driver who took us to our hotel didn't speak English, but grumpiness is universal. She knew enough English to tell us she would accept our euros, but not give us change in euros. She would not give us change in Czech money either, so the fare ended up twice as much as it should have been. We were staying in the Charles Bridge Palace Hotel, which, unsurprisingly, was right next to the famous Charles Bridge. It was a lovely old building which was converted into a hotel in 2012. It had high ceilings and was full of ghosts like every respectable old building should be. Being adapted from an existing building, there were some weird passages scattered around the place, and on more than one occasion we walked out of our room and straight down the stairs opposite into the kitchen. After a short rest we walked to the Charles Bridge and were immediately struck by how much colder it was than Vienna. It was very windy, so we made it halfway across the bridge before turning around. The sun had already gone down, and we knew it would be much warmer the next day. We weren't intending to walk on the bridge at night anyway, as apart from the temperature, it is well known that many of the statues come alive after dark. Opposite the bridge was a small alley which took us into the centre of town, where the wind had dropped, so it was much warmer. Despite being off-season, the streets were packed, making it a little uncomfortable, but thankfully the lanes opened out more as we approached the centre, which was a large, pedestrianised square. A crowd had gathered around the very impressive astronomical clock, waiting for the little show that happens every half an hour. We stood at the front with hundreds of people, so I held my phone up high and took a video of the people behind us. It wasn't until I looked at the video later that I saw that two Italian girls saw what I was doing and so put on a little show for me. Soon the bells started ringing, and some of the figures did a little ring-a-ring-a-roses at the top of the tower. The main square was very busy, and at one end there was what looked like a cathedral with a large building in front of it, so no one could see the bottom half of the cathedral. Heaven knows how they got planning permission for that. We went up the tower and paid extra for an award-winning two-person pod which looked like something out of Star Trek. It was the perfect time to visit as the sun was setting over the million red-tiled roofs that made up the city. When I worked for British Airways in 1999, staff used to love going to Prague, which was very cheap. A friend of mine stayed there for a few days over the millennium and paid £5 a night for a hotel room. Now everyone was saying how expensive it had become, but it was still a lot cheaper than Vienna or even Dubrovnik. The next morning we bought tickets for the hop-on, hop-off bus. It was a bit daft, really, because we didn't intend to do much hopping, as the only stop we needed was the castle. The main reason for using the bus was for the accompanying audio tour, but that was very disappointing. An audio tour should be narrated by an actual human, but all they had done was paste the text into Google and use the awful electronic voice so it sounded like Stephen Hawking was our tour guide. To make matters worse, when there was no one speaking, they played dramatic orchestral music on a 10-minute loop. Every time the music reached the same crescendo, I had to take the headphones off. Even Federika, who is far more tolerant than me, found it a bit much. The castle was the largest ancient castle in the world. I had no idea what that meant, but it didn't look like your standard castle where you keep princesses in towers and pour boiling oil on invading enemies. It seemed to me more like a town on a hill, although there was no denying it would have been a bugger to invade. The castle was split up into lots of small sections, and again we had to pay extra for each section, but we were not that interested in most of the extras and were just happy to wander around. In the centre was a cathedral which, from the town below, looked dark and foreboding, like something from Harry Potter. There was free entrance to the cathedral, but only to the first section, so as soon as you got to the pews, there was a barrier with a ticket-only entrance. There were some very impressive stained-glass windows, which were all we were interested in anyway. We always liked to light candles when we went to these places, and I was surprised to see the giant, fat candles all neatly laid out beneath a statue of Mary. I didn't like the look of the candles, so I ignored them. Then I saw Federika looking for an unused candle to light, but there weren't any. It turned out that they were electronic candles, so when you put a coin in the slot, a quite realistic flame appears on a candle. I had always embraced technology, but this felt wrong, and I was sure that Del Boy from Only Fools and Horses must have had something to do with it. Where will it end? Will it be confessionals next?
Good afternoon. Your confession is important to us. Please press the appropriate button on the dial pad in front of you. For big sins, select button 1. For small sins, select button 2. For worshipping false idols, press button 1. For coveting, press button 2.
The seriousness of sins will have to be changed to reflect modern-day life.
Taking the name of the Lord in vain and not observing the Sabbath can now be self-absolved. Thou shalt not steal is no longer a sin if item is stolen from a big store and the goods are valued at less than £200. Start recording your confession at the sound of the tone. It will be assessed by AI, which will generate and send your penance by email. If you don't have access to the internet, you will be classified as beyond redemption. Thank you for using Sins Are Us.
We walked around the grounds, which at times were a little uncomfortable as it was threatening to rain, but it never really happened, so we managed to see everything we wanted and had a good lunch in the castle cafe.
My mobile phone just won't connect. My laptop won't turn on. My house was made in China. My pension in Saigon. I'll sing a song of sixpence from a time so long ago, with undercover listening to pirate radio. I'll sing a song of sixpence, a bucket full of memories.
We took the hop-on, hop-off bus back to town for the inclusive boat ride. The boat was pretty packed, but we managed to get good seats near the window. We would have preferred to sit outside, but it was much too cold, although a lot of people didn't seem to mind. It was a pleasant enough ride, and quite special going underneath the Charles Bridge, which offered a much better view than walking along the embankment. It lasted 1 hour, but most people lost interest after a few minutes. A couple sitting next to us were glued to their mobile phones the whole time, and other groups of people spent the whole time talking. We strolled back to the main square, and when the sun went down, it turned very cold, but we still managed to walk around comfortably as long as we kept out of the wind. The next day we rose early and started with a walk across the Charles Bridge to the Kafka Museum. Outside, there was a statue of 2 men pissing into a big puddle, and the public was invited to move the statues' torsos around with the purpose of spelling out words with their piss. I am not using poetic license. This statue actually exists. In the Kafka Museum, my audio guide kept going on about what a genius Kafka was, which I found a little irritating, as I hated the way the word was always being thrown around like confetti. I asked Mr. Google if anyone else thought that Kafka was overrated. One article in The Guardian informed me that Kafka was a bigger genius than Shakespeare and Mozart, but only very clever people were able to appreciate him. I believe that is a common belief on planet Zorko. Another article, not in The Guardian, was entitled 12 Reasons Why We Should Never Read Kafka's Major Works. All 12 reasons looked perfectly valid to me, with the top of the list being that he never actually finished any of his books. I started reading The Trial years ago, and the first part had me hooked, but then it just went on and on about nothing, so I abandoned it, and that was before I knew the book had no ending. Having said all that, I enjoyed our visit, and it was well presented, although it was a bit cheeky calling it a museum, considering all the exhibits were photocopies. Next stop was the John Lennon Wall. Shortly after his death, a local artist painted a picture of him on the wall with some lyrics, and from there, the wall became a symbol of peace and freedom. Everyone was meant to write their name on the wall or paint a picture, so it was full of colour and very impressive. The rest of the day, we just strolled around and once again clocked up nearly 20 kilometres. At one point, when I thought I couldn't go on, we discovered Federika had lost her favourite jumper, so we spent another 20 minutes backtracking in the hope of finding it, but to no avail. We made our way back and managed to find the only available seats in a bar in the main square. It was lovely sitting there and watching the world go by. We had an excellent dinner, but as always there were no vegetables, not even as an optional side dish. We were constantly being told how important it was to eat vegetables, and yet whole nations were pretending that they didn't exist. By now, we had exhausted all the tourist sites, so we decided to visit an attraction we had passed several times, the Sex Machine Museum. Being a big fan of James Brown, I naturally assumed it was a museum dedicated to the great man and his most famous song. When buying the tickets, I asked if there was a discount for seniors, which there often was. The girl said no, but she must have felt sorry for us because she gave us a student discount instead. I was 70 years old, and there I was getting my first student discount. Once inside, I was shocked to see that instead of a James Brown exhibition, it was a museum of torture instruments. On the first floor were photos of people with piercings in places I didn't even know existed. It took a while before I realized it was a museum of sex toys going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. This also came as a shock to me, as in common with other children of the 60s, I thought that it was our generation that invented gratuitous sex. It turned out that it had been going on for centuries. The star of the show for me was a small ceramic whistle that was placed inside the rectum for the purpose of playing a tune using flatulence. Considering this was a museum devoted to sexual practices, I can only assume that some people got off on arse whistling. We had an early rise to catch the train back to Vienna and our connecting flight to Zagreb. Because time was tight, we booked a 5-minute taxi ride through the hotel, which cost nearly the same as the 4.5-hour first-class train journey to Vienna. It was a short flight to Zagreb, and we arrived at the Hotel Dubrovnik early evening. Despite being so far inland, there was a very good fish restaurant that we were both looking forward to visiting. The food was great, but I didn't enjoy the meal much because of the young child in front of us who was playing cartoons on her mother's mobile phone. I was relieved when their food was served, as I thought we would get some respite from the noise. But no, the woman fed her child the entire meal, so he didn't once look up from the screen. When it was time for them to go, she even managed to put on his coat without interrupting his viewing. We did manage to eat dessert in peace. We would never dream of eating dinner at home with the TV in the background, so I don't see why we should be forced to do it in public. The reason for this visit to Zagreb was to go to the IKEA store. In England, we used to treat it as a day out, and sometimes arrived home with a car jammed full of their goods. We had been looking for a settee for ages, but either the back was too low or the seat too narrow. Even with the large selection in IKEA, we only found one that we liked, and it was at a good price, so we ordered it. We spent the rest of the day strolling around the store, and as we couldn't take much on the plane, we made a note of what we wanted so we could order it from home and have it delivered. Disaster struck at night when my favourite Zagreb restaurant ran out of duck, but we still had a pleasant meal. Our flight the next day wasn't until 10 p.m, so we spent the day pottering around. We were treated to some kind of changing of the guard ceremony, which I had seen many times before, but not in the middle of a street like that. The afternoon started to drag, and I was ready to go home, but it was a sunny afternoon, and we managed to find a lovely little park, so Federika left me there to have a quick nap. It was interrupted when I felt something nibbling my big toe, which turned out to be a large puppy. The owners were concerned, but I waved to them that it was okay and I was happy to play with their puppy even when it playfully bit my toes a little harder than was comfortable. After a short barking session, it bounded off back to its owners, leaving me with dog drool seeping from my ears, but of course, I loved it. It wasn't long before I was back to sleep, and not long before I was woken up. This time, it was by a young couple who sat near me and started looking at a video on their mobile phone with the volume up loud. We arrived at the huge and completely empty Zagreb airport with a choice of 70 seats in the cafe. If only air travel were always like that. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be travelling to Brighton in the UK, Kathmandu and Nagakot in Nepal.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.